It's time for a pretty exciting topic, which is Title IX. I know many of you from the feedback you gave me about this term, this class, that you're excited to learn more about Title IX, to understand it more, what the breadth of the law means, and just to understand how it impacts athletic opportunity for women, maybe your experiences as you go through and continue your education. So we're excited. We're excited to get this journey going, and covering Title IX the next couple of weeks of our class materials. You know, it's hard to imagine that just 46 years ago, young women were not admitted into many colleges and universities. They weren't awarded athletic scholarships, or if they were very, very rare. Math and science was a realm reserved for the boys. In those days, back 40 plus years ago, girls took PE, but they learned to square dance instead of play sports. They studied home economics instead of training for like more male oriented, i.e., higher paying trades. Girls could become teachers and nurses, but not principals or doctors. And they didn't get tenure when they were college or when they were teaching at the higher education levels, as some were doing, but they certainly weren't getting tenure. They weren't getting those opportunities. There was no such thing as sexual harassment, because boys will be boys. That was the thought. That was the thought back then, just 4 decades ago. And if a student got pregnant, her education stopped. All of these things, all of these components that play into an educational environment, were impacted by the implementation, of Title IX. So we're going to talk about the what, who, when, and why of Title IX. We are going to focus our efforts on athletics and how Title IX impacts athletics, sporting opportunities for girls and women in sport. But it is important for you to know and really understand that Title IX is not a sports law. It's not an athletic law, amendment of any kind. It is an educational law. So when you look at the PowerPoint, and I have 2 PowerPoints posted on sort of like an introduction to Title IX, you're going to see some numbers from 1970. This was pre-Title IX. Title IX was passed in 1972. So in 1970, you saw about 1 in 27 high school girls played varsity sports. About 31,000 women participated in college athletics. Female college athletes received only about 2% of the overall athletic budgets, and women coached 90% of women's college teams. So that was all before Title IX passed. And then in 1972, 37 little words came along that made a major impact on the educational environment, and certainly became a major impact on sporting opportunities for girls and women. And that law, those 37 words are: no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. You should know those 37 words. You should know what they mean. You should understand the extent to which those 37 words put together, what they represent for equality in educational experiences for both sexes that get a chance to experience an educational setting. We do have President Richard Nixon to thank for signing the act into law, the bill into law, on June 23rd, 1972. So we're coming up on the 46th anniversary of Title IX, and even more exciting, we're coming up on the 50th anniversary of Title IX. In just 4 short years from now, we'll be celebrating the 50th anniversary of the passage of Title IX. It was a seminal act. It was certainly a beacon of hope for the future of equality in education, providing women with solid legal protection from discrimination in an educational setting. And we do have President Nixon again to thank for putting that, sending that bill into law, and having it as a part of the Education Amendments of 1972. And so, again, the law states no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to any discrimination under any education program and or activity receiving federal financial assistance. 37 very influential and very smart words. Now, it's important to know that, like I was talking about at the top of the video, that Title IX is not a sports law. It's not an athletics law. Many people confuse it as that because most of the time when people hear about Title IX, they hear it being referenced in an athletic environment, talking about equal sport opportunities for girls and women, or giving them their fair shot, or something along those lines. Or we cut sports because of Title IX. We cut men's sports because of Title IX, or things like that. But Title IX has 10 key areas that it covers. And just as a quick rundown, and I'm not going to go through all of these specifically, but just to give you kind of a quick overview of what each of them mean, I think it's important for you to realize that this is not a law that is just about honoring and providing opportunities for in athletics and an educational environment, but lots of things when it comes to equity in educational experiences. So access to higher ed in general is the very first key area of Title IX. It's hard to believe it, but until the 70s, many colleges and universities just flat out refused to admit women. It was believed that women were more concerned about marriage and children than earning a higher education degree. And so a lot of times you could see that in the applicant pool, there would be women candidates who were just as strong of candidates for admission, if not better, academically and maybe co-curricularly and social interaction wise, yet would be denied compared to their male counterparts that didn't have as strong of an application. So it was very common, even up until the 70s, that you would see women being denied, just straight up denied, access to higher education. Athletics is the second key area. The third key area is career education. What we tended to see pre-Title IX was in vocational courses in high schools. Most girls could only take home ec, cooking, sewing, sort of those domestic classes, while most boys would take shop, like woodworking, metalworking, automobile mechanics, and those types of sort of like male sort of dominated industries, and schools were allowed. They were allowed, like permitted. It was not sort of illegal, or there was no ramifications for schools that denied women training in the fields that society considered inappropriate for them. So women typically trained in lower wage, traditionally female jobs like health aides, cosmetologists, secretaries, teachers. I mean, think about the vocations of like your grandmothers, maybe your mothers, but probably more likely your grandmothers and your great-grandmothers. What were they? Were they teachers? Were they secretaries, nurses? Were they hairdressers? Anything related to like home economics, or even like the hospitality industry. It's probably a good chance that a lot of the older women and the older generations of your family, those are the type of careers, if they had a career, those are the type of professions that they had. If they didn't just stay at home and take care of the family, because that was obviously a very common sort of career vocation for women and older generations to take to do. The next key area is education for pregnant and parenting students. It was really not uncommon if a teenager became pregnant that she usually lost her chance to get an education. Most schools would just expel a pregnant student, wouldn't let her return to school if she chose to continue with the pregnancy. And just think, like, what a waste of potential. What a disservice we're doing to a parent who needs an education to get a good working opportunity, a good job, and a good, get a good opportunity to, or a good chance at a good profession to make a living, to raise her family. It was really a shame that that's how they saw pregnant women, were to deny them the access to education as opposed to give them the exposure and the resources to education to help them better themselves so that they could hopefully get a job, a meaningful job, and a career where they could help support their family. Employment is another area pre-Title IX where the majority of women working in education taught in elementary and secondary schools. Those who did teach in the college environment, which was a very low percentage pre-Title IX, were primarily at women's only colleges, and they typically weren't awarded tenure. They earned smaller salaries than their male counterparts, and that was perfectly legal to do that. And only a few women were what we would see as high-level administrators or positions of power throughout all of educational institutions, and I'm talking from elementary all the way up through colleges. We're still, of course, working on equal pay issues, particularly related to higher ed. We don't tend to follow the same scale that sort of public school systems do when it comes to teacher salaries. So we're still really dealing with equal pay issues, not just with faculty, but in our athletic departments. We are seeing that across the nation. This is a very general statement, that typically the females are getting paid less than, and it's pretty much in line with the national discrepancy and pay gap, or salary gap that we see between the two sexes. The learning environment before Title IX was pretty popular, and harmful gender stereotypes were common. That's what we typically saw. That was mirrored in the school books, in the school texts that were being used in elementary school. So in those texts before, you used to see the males were always the active ones, and they were the ones that were inventive, and they were the brave ones. Always sort of the ones to maybe more admire in terms of strength and confidence and courage. And the few females that were actually illustrated in textbooks were presented certainly in roles that were very clearly domestic. As wives, they were nurturing, they accommodated everyone around them. Usually they were considered full-time mothers, parents, again, secretaries, nurses, teachers. Those were the typical roles that females took on in the textbooks that we were using before we thought about what is the learning environment saying, what are the messages we're sending to our kids when we're showing them that the males only assume this type of role, these types of portrayals in our society, and women do these types of roles. So the learning environment is a key area that is covered under Title IX. Math and science, everybody just accepted it. The stereotype was that girls didn't like math, they didn't like science, and therefore they wouldn't be good at it. There was the stereotype, and people really just bought into it and believed it. Oftentimes girls were steered away from higher level classes in the subjects in the STEM subjects. They were discouraged from joining math and science clubs. And the fact of the matter is that girls, when applying themselves like their male counterparts, were scoring just as well, or if not better than some of the boys on standardized tests when it came to STEM areas. So, before Title IX, girls and women didn't really have access to STEM related coursework, and opportunities and clubs and organizations, and then of course setting themselves up for high paying jobs in those science dominated areas. And so that was an area that was also focused on when it came to Title IX and its coverage. Sexual harassment, again, boys will be boys, and that's how people thought. That's how people used to think. Girls were getting harassed in the educational environment on the daily, all the time, multiple times a day, getting called, sexist names, being catcalled, being pinched in the rear, being slapped on the butt. Any of these types of behaviors were totally accepted and totally normal, and it was really common to hear sexually charged names being called to women, rumors being spread about women and not being able to stop them, and it was really just a sad reality that girls and women had to take that in the educational setting. They didn't have any recourse if they were getting harassed, to go somewhere where someone would listen to them and say, we're going to put a stop to this. It was typically, oh, don't, pay much attention to that. Boys will be boys. That's just how they are. Oh, they're just blowing off steam. I mean, all these different, like, ridiculous retorts, right? And it was sort of a very frustrating environment for girls a lot of times, because obviously a lot of their confidence was taken away. They were made to feel lesser than, they were disrespected, and they just had no place to go to complain about the way they were being treated, and felt that they were cared for. Standardized tests, and this is an area covered in Title IX, under the Title IX law as well, because it was typical for the standardized tests to be catered to white males, middle class and upper class males. I mean, the way the standardized testing is biased is towards that demographic, and so that was something that was taken a look at with Title IX too. And then technology. I mean, you can't, the old stereotype that girls can't achieve in math and science also, of course, sort of took on a new dimension when it came to technology, and so they were sort of assumed that that was the case for technology too, that girls and women didn't care about technology. They weren't interested in it. They weren't good at it. And computer program was considered a male domain and a male, a male career industry to pursue, and that it was sort of like, it was designed for boys because of all their interest in computer technology, and they're geeking out on it and all that. So it was, women using computers to be a secretary, to take notes, to do data entry, and that was the reason she used technology and for nothing else. And so this was an area as well that was covered under Title IX. So look at that list. It's a lot, right? I mean, there's 10 key areas that Title IX covered. Those 37 words covered these 10 things in the educational setting, and created or pursues the opportunity to create an equal access in these areas, equal opportunities in these areas for both sexes. And so it's an exciting law. That's why it was such a beacon of hope for the future of equality, because people saw that there were so many opportunities that were not previously made available to women, all of a sudden open up and become available to women. And so it was just an exciting time when things were sort of shifting and changing. So those numbers in 1970 were what they were, and now we're going to shift our focus right on just kind of focusing on the athletic component of Title IX. And I talked about those numbers at the onset of this whole discussion in 1970, and then what we see today in exchange for our time with Title IX and developing ourselves from the from the parameters of Title IX, is that now 1 and 2.5 high school girls play varsity sports. 170,000 women participate in college athletics, a big jump from 30,000. Female college athletes receive budgets. Female college athletes receive 45% of the overall athletic budget. So we're talking about a 43% increase from 40 plus years ago. And one number that is different and has drastically dropped is now, instead of 90% of women coaching women's college teams, we're seeing that number at 42%. There are many reasons why that number has dropped. I'll sort of talk about some of them throughout the time talking about Title IX, but we'll also come to a point where we will focus on how and why that number has dropped so drastically and honestly is continuing to decline. The first time I taught history of women in sport 7 years ago, that number was hovering around 45%, and in 7 years it's already dropped for 3%, and is actually continuing to drop. It's not starting back in an upward trajectory. It is continuing to decline. So that's a really troubling statistic, and that's probably one of the ways that we have seen a sort of a bad result of Title IX. And so we'll talk about sort of why some of those what could be some factors that are accommodating that kind of a drop in women coaching women's sports. But 1 in 2.5 high school girls playing varsity sports, I mean, that's a that's 10 times the amount than 40 years ago. 170,000, that's, you know, up more than 5 times the amount that was 40 years ago. So again, 43% of the college budgets in athletics are being dedicated to women athletes. So we've seen so much positive change from the implementation of Title IX, and it's been a really good way to access opportunity for women. So let's talk about some of the major players in Title IX, right? So this first part of the video, I'm going to finish up talking about these main people that are really important to the development of Title IX, and then we'll take a little break before we continue on talking about the law and what it means, the full sort of definition of the law. So the first person I want to talk about is Birch Bayh. He was a Democratic senator from Indiana. He was a senator for about 20 years in politics in Washington, and he was the Senate sponsor that helped author Title IX. He was not a primary author of Title IX. He was the Senate sponsor. So he was the senator in the U.S. Senate at the time when Title IX was trying to be written into law, that sponsored the bill on the Senate floor. He was really invested in Title IX because he talks about this story a lot, which is really sweet. He talks about his wife and how when he met her, he will always say she was smarter than him. She was a brilliant woman, but she was denied entrance into University of Virginia for college. And this was the early 60s. And there was something like 21,000 women were turned down admission at the University of Virginia, and 0 men were turned down admission at the University of Virginia in the early 60s. And so obviously we were seeing that the trend was that women who were applying to institutions of higher learning weren't getting the same opportunity as men. You can't tell me that all the men that applied in relationship to all those women that applied were that much more qualified and admissible over those women. So that was a problem, and he was closely affected by the fact that his wife wasn't getting this access to an opportunity to better herself, to progress her education, to pursue what she wanted to educationally so that she could become the best she wanted to and could become and have avenues open up for her. And so he understood right then and there the importance of trying to create regulations that would not allow schools to discriminate based on sex. So he became the Senate sponsor for Title IX. The primary author, who you want to make sure that you know, is Patsy Mink. She was a Democratic representative from Hawaii. She was 2 times a representative in the House in D.C. Her first stint was for about 12 years, from 65 to 77, when she authored Title IX, and then again from 1990 to 2002. She was the primary author. She was the first. There's a couple of really great facts about Patsy Mink, because she was the first woman of color and the first Asian American woman elected to Congress. She was also the first woman elected to Congress from the state of Hawaii. And so she is the principal author of Title IX. In 2002, Congress actually agreed to rename Title IX, its full, sort of formal name, to the Patsy T. Mink Equal Opportunity in Education Act. But we all know it as Title IX. That's the short name of it, and that's what we all refer to it as. But if you ever hear the Patsy Mink Equal Opportunity in Education Act, it is referring to the law of Title IX. So Patsy Mink, primary author of Title IX. And this is a woman who literally spent her entire political career pushing for equal rights for humans. She was a great humanitarian. She actually received the Medal of Freedom posthumously from President Obama because of her impressive record of humanitarian efforts while she was in office. The other author that we want to make sure that we are aware of is a Portland Democrat from Oregon. Her name is Edith Green. She was a representative for about 20 years in Congress. She was a co-author of the bill with Patsy Mink. It was pretty well known that Edith Green helped establish the amendments to the Civil Rights Act. And so she sort of continued her efforts with, again, sort of these civil rights opportunities by helping establish some of the language to the bill of Title IX. We like to believe that her that Edith Green's tenacity gave millions of women access to school sports teams, and even a chance to simply attend college. So we sort of look at her as someone who was just a critical player in helping to draft and create the document or the bill of Title IX. And then we want to make sure we're aware of one of sort of the primary lobbyists in helping push Title IX to be enacted as a bill. Bernice Sandler is sort of who we refer to as the godmother of Title IX, the godmother of Title IX. She's a senior scholar at the Women's Research and Education Institute. She was a subcommittee member for Title IX. She's an aggressive supporter of equal educational rights of girls and women. She has helped sort of mentor many women who have felt like they have been discriminated against in an educational setting. She's an expert in women's educational rights and educational equality. She also sort of thinks about the opportunities that we need to provide to women who have been exposed to sexual harassment in the classroom. And so she's just been a staunch supporter of educational equity, non-discrimination in the educational setting. And she has really just been someone who's helped with strategies to initially help pass Title IX, but then now since it has passed, continuing to make sure the integrity of the law is supported. On the screen in the lecture that shows Bernice Sandler, there's a link for something called The Sporting Chance. It's a documentary on Title IX, the passage of Title IX. It's a longer trailer about that documentary. I think it's 4 to 5 minutes long. And Bernice Sandler is in that trailer. It's Birch Bayh's in that trailer. There's a lot of really great advocates for Title IX that are in that trailer. And so it gives you just kind of a quick synopsis of the impact of Title IX, who's been impacted by it, what people feel is the importance of Title IX. And of course, it's just a snippet of what the entire documentary of Sporting Chance is about, but it does give you just a good sort of baseline of what the power of this law has been. So if you get a chance to click on that link and check that out. Just on to two other women that I want to highlight. These are women who were active in athletics, college athletics, that help to promote Title IX. They were on the front end of pioneering women's roles in athletics as it relates to the opportunities created through Title IX. Judy Sweet is the first one. She's the first female AD over a men's and women's varsity intercollegiate sports program. When she took over at San Diego, University of UC San Diego in 1975. She, for 24 years, supervised 23 sports at San Diego, and when she got the job at San Diego, she was young. She was barely out of college. She got the job over some older, long-standing male coaches that were at San Diego at the time. And so she, it was a pretty treacherous road initially for her, but she ended up being wildly successful. She at the time she oversaw the program when it received the Sears Directors Cup for the most successful sports program in Division III at the time. She then went on, after she left San Diego, went on to become the first female president of the NCAA. She's been named to the Institute for International Sport's 100 Most Influential Sport Educators in the World, and she is just a continued champion for women's rights in athletics and equitable treatment in athletics and sports. And our second woman I want to talk about is Christine Grant. She was born in Scotland, but then she was educated at Iowa. She obtained a PhD at the University of Iowa. Then she became an AD at Iowa, and so she also, like Judy Sweet, she was it was pretty uncommon for women to oversee athletics. But she oversaw the women's athletics program at Iowa. She was a very successful administrator. She received the Gerald Ford Award from the NCAA and the Institute. She's also on that 100 most influential list from the Institute of International Sport Educators, like Judy Sweet. And she continues to be a consultant for Civil Rights Title IX Task Force. So she still sits on, hearings and, issues with Title IX that have been filed with the Office of Civil Rights. And she continues to help, again, push for equitable opportunities in the athletic environment when it comes to Title IX. So, the last thing I want you to, before I end this segment, is to note that on the last two slides of this PowerPoint, that there is a couple more links that you can click on. There are links on both Judy Sweet and Christine Grant's pages. What does Title IX mean to me? And you can hear quick little interviews with them about what does Title IX mean to them. That's great because you get to hear from them. You get to hear Christine Grant's cool Scottish accent, which there's nothing wrong with wanting to hear that, just for that reason alone. And then on the second to last page, there's a Title IX link. You should click on that. That just gives you some good information about Title IX, a quick little video that would be good for you to watch. So that's a good, just quick introduction to what is Title IX, the 10 key areas, what Title IX says, when it was passed, who wrote it into law, and then the key people, the legislators that helped write the bill and create the law, and then those people who helped push for the advocacy of the law, and then have continued to not only pioneer through the opportunities Title IX created, but that they continue to keep the law intact and support the law the way that it was meant to be executed in our educational settings. So we'll take a little break, and you can get the next video ready, and we'll continue to talk about some of the main premises of the law, and we'll start talking about sort of the history of governance around women's college athletics.